social media, interpret your own stories on TikTok, social, work experience, contacts. So I just made a mental note of that really.
Get you to think that's the way you started. So I was put yourself where they are now and sort of talk about your journey from there to here. Then we can talk about what you've done and your work. What you're doing now, what you're going to be doing. So I don't know how much you can tell us about what you're working on at the moment. And yeah, what's your advice? Advice that you just think
Absolutely. That's so mad.
It's weird because I obviously for a living interview people, talk them into doing interviews. But I've got social anxiety, so I don't like doing interviews. You know what? You can. I think the nice thing is you can still get to where you want without being necessarily extroverted, and you can still. Just don't ask me to a vox pop because then you start having a panic attack.
They've been doing loads of
I
them.
quite used to do that.
It's my favourite song to do.
I think it's the Gen Z. It's Gen Z, that's fine.
But you know what? It also has a scope to go viral. So I don't know if you go on
maybe.
TikTok and then you can see the videos that go viral are when you're just asking the general public. Yeah.
I think instead of seeing them, they know what they are, but they've never had a label on them. So when I explain what it is, oh, we've seen them.
Yeah.
I took that picture of you.
I know. I'd say that.
Good afternoon. Thanks everybody for staying. We've got another fantastic session. You've nearly made it to the end of the day, just a couple more to go, and they're both set to be brilliant. So for now, if you could just welcome, we've got Monika, Plaha and Rahil, Sheikh. And they are BBC News / Panorama investigative journalists. And I feel like we've already covered quite a lot between us now. But the first thing I want you to do is just kind of take yourselves back to where these faces are when you were at this point sort of in your career or in your studies, and sort of just tell us how you got from there to where you are now.
Do you want to go first? Do I talk into this? Hello. Yeah. Well, firstly, I want to say it feels like it's underwhelming for you guys. Like you had Piers Morgan, and then you look at me like, who's this guy, right? So no, like I work for Panorama now as an investigative journalist and filmmaker. But 10 years ago, I was sitting where you guys are sitting, not here, but somewhere else, and doing an MA in journalism. So I know what you guys are thinking and feeling and going through, and I know what you're looking at me for, right? You're just probably thinking, is he going to give me a job? Will he help with that? No, just no, like you kind of want to see, can you go from doing the course and actually get into the industry? And the short answer to that is absolutely. And I think for me, when I did the MA in journalism, if I didn't do it, I don't think I'd be where I am now. So you guys are in the right position. So hopefully, you feel confident in that and you make the most of the opportunity to do the best you can with it.
And I think for me, so I graduated, I think back in 2014 now, and I got so many rejections because I knew I wanted to be a journalist. So I applied to so many internships, journalism schemes, and I think I must have got 6 rejections from BBC, 6 rejections from ITV, and I was just thinking, what on earth do I do? But just let the rejections motivate you. Don't give up. And I entered this competition called ITV Breaking Into News. It's run by Media Trust. So I think always be really proactive and have a look on socials about, what competitions are going on? Are there any schemes for me? Don't just look at the obvious BBC and ITV because there are so many routes in. And then I ended up winning this competition that was organised by Media Trust and ITV, Young Journalist of the Year. And it's very much on the story idea I did, and that was on skin whitening products being sold under the counter. And I used very much my own experiences and the story idea that I did, and that's just what made it stand out. It's what made it unique. So I think when it comes to ideas as well, what will set you apart is how original they are, the access, and make it unique to you. And essentially, yeah, that's how I got in. And then I did my MA. I got a scholarship through the NUJ to do my MA. And to be honest, guys, it was a lot of work experience. It was a lot of networking. We had Rachel Corp, who's at ITN, the news editor now, who came in to do a career talk when I was at City University in London. And I just kept in touch with her ever since. And she gave me my first ever job at ITV News. So just keep in touch with who comes on these talks, be proactive, be on the lookout on social media for what schemes are going on, and keep a story idea journal with you 24/7, because you just never know when they're going to come in handy. So that's what I would say.
And how did those schemes that you went on, and obviously those contacts, how did that lead to BBC Look North and then on to Panorama for you?
Yes, so it was a lot of networking essentially, and then when I did ITV, the Young Journalist of the Year competition, a lot of them recommended you need to go and do an MA, because that's when you get your work placement, you're going to get to know people that come on and do the talks. And then I did my MA that was funded through the NUJ, and then I just managed to get lots of work experience and placements. And it was just after that, I kind of fell into a brick wall thinking, what am I going to do next? So I hung out at Media City. I went to a Jeremy Kyle show because actually through one of my interviews at uni, I ended up interviewing Jeremy Kyle, and he was like, come to one of my shows, as I did. So I enjoyed about 6 hours of Jeremy Kyle. And then I saw Naga Manchetti outside the BBC Breakfast Studios. And I was like, I'm going to shoot my shot. So I literally ran up to her. I was so ruthless and relentless, and I really wanted it. And I just thought, I've got nothing to lose here. I went up to her and I said, Naga, I really want to work for BBC News. I think I was about 22, 23 at the time. And she was like, absolutely. And she said there was an opening coming up on BBC Breakfast TV, and this is what they're looking for. This is the kind of stories that they're after. And I just spoke to her for about half an hour in the pouring rain outside BBC Breakfast Studios. And then a month later, I got the job at BBC Breakfast TV. And I actually used that story in the board itself to the editors, where they were like, because they always ask, the first question is, how did you prepare for this job? And you always have to talk to someone who was at BBC Breakfast. And I was like, why not just bring my Naga Manchetti story into it? And they were like, you ran up to her. And I was like, absolutely, I've got nothing to lose.
Journalistic instinct, so you have to do that, don't you?
Exactly. And essentially that's how I got at BBC Breakfast. And then once you're in, it's very much, then I went to Newsrun to be a reporter, and then I went to BBC Look North, where I present and report, and then I present on the main channel now, and then I did a Panorama, and then I do various documentaries which I present, produce and report on. So it's very much who you know, giving those ideas, the impact of those ideas, and just building the way up.
And Rahil, what about you? Was it sort of a similar story? Did you just go and grab somebody that you kind of really looked up to, or was it more sort of working your way up?
Yeah, no, I'm too socially awkward to do any of what she did. I did it a different way, and hopefully some of you guys can relate. There's not one way to get into the industry and do what you want to do. There's different ways, and I think find what's comfortable for you and take that route as well. For me, it was straight after the MA. I just wanted to work in a newsroom. So I just applied for jobs all over the country, and I got rejected like about 1 million times. And I got only one job interview for a local radio station, a very obscure one in West London somewhere. Wasn't paying very much, but I thought, well, okay, let me just, it's a foot in the door. So I just took that job straight away. But I was just very lucky. It just happened to be a news reading job for the radio. And I took it and worked there for a year, and it was 5 a.m. starts in the morning, and just worked my way up. And so it was, I think the key thing is that, and what helps you is if you have good ideas that you can just pitch to anyone who listens, to any editor, any boss, wherever, and just sell those ideas, because if they see your passion for it, that's what will sort of get you quite far. So I started in local radio, moved into BBC local radio, went into BBC national radio, and then I made the switch from there into, I went to Newsnight, and then Panorama, where I am now. And really, I'd say that the way that transition sort of happened was wherever I went, I was just pushing to do original journalism. whether it was local level or national level, and that just caught the attention of the people at Panorama, and where it was actually them reaching out to me, well, oh, why don't you come and join us for a bit and work on a film, and then it kind of led to where I am now.
And before we sort of touch on Panorama for you both, I just want to speak about what you said there about being socially awkward. A lot of our students, suffer with anxiety, nerves, especially because of things like COVID, because a lot of their education was from home, those really pivotal years. But they're probably thinking, how do they get to where you are? How can they still, get through those barriers as you have? What would you say is kind of any advice or any reassurance you can give them? Yeah,
just be yourself. I think be authentic to yourself, but also don't be afraid to just step out that comfort zone, because sometimes that anxiousness and that fear that you have is actually holding you back from your full potential. And really, I think in this industry, you really have to love journalism to do it. There are not, I'm pretty sure, I don't know if they've told you, but it's not the highest paid job that you could potentially do. So you really have to love it, especially in the early stages. And that love and passion for whatever motivates you to do it is what's going to drive you. So whether you're a bit quieter or you're a bit shy or you're very confident, that's just your natural personality. But as long as you have the passion to deliver journalism and have really good ideas, I think that's what will see you through.
And on that, I don't know how many of you guys actually want to present, but when I was younger, I couldn't say boo to a goose. I was so shy, so nervous. I would always tremble. But I just had this passion for broadcast journalism. And I remember when I first started presenting at BBC Look North, I was terrified. And I reached out to Louise Minchin. I was like, oh my God, how have I got this job? Like, I don't think I'm good enough, just always constantly doubting myself. But I knew it was something that I need to improve on. So I reached out to Louise Minchin, and she, by the way, in this industry, you can literally email anyone, and 9 times out of 10, they will be your mentor. So any journalist that you admire, just reach out to them, and they will help you, no doubt. And Louise Minchin was like, Monika, when you present and you're looking in the autocue, you're not going to die. What's the worst that's going to happen? She was like, it's almost like it's a sudden rush of all these fears, but in actual fact, you trust yourself. You are in control. You've got your auto cue right in front of you. You also have your notes in front of you, but don't forget that before you go live, you know the story. Trust yourself, trust your gut. And I really held on to that advice. And just, I learned to trust myself a lot more, and it just really helped me. And I think when it even came to then the national news as well, and God knows you're presenting in front of millions of people across the world, things do happen. The technology does fail. The gallery goes up in chaos. It's a breaking news story. But as long as you're in control, you know the story, and you trust yourself, I think that's the key thing in all of this. That's how I kind of overcame my presenter anxieties from the beginning.
And how does that compare, so being live in front of, tens of thousands or even millions of people, being live compared to, pre-recording something like Panorama? Because the process for both must be completely different.
It is. To be honest, when you do 6 hours of live news presenting, you just forget that the cameras are there. And because it's so dark, and no, you guys have the studio, don't you? So you can probably see as well, that, by an hour in, you're just like, oh, okay, it's just like I'm talking to my mate. And that's one of the things that is the advice as well that Louise Minchin gave me. It's like, just pretend you're talking to your mum, pretend you're talking to your mate, pretend you're talking at a pub about a story that you find really fascinating. And I think, practice makes perfect. So the more you do, the more natural and the more easier it becomes. But I think when it came to pre-recording Panorama, I'm not going to lie, it is easier. Pre-records are a lot easier, but I think it's very much journalism focused, because you have one interview that you need to nail, and you need to make sure that you get everything out of that particular interview. I don't know about you, because obviously you've done more shoots than me. So because you did a live as well.
So I think, your question was about the difference between doing lives and doing a Panorama. So it's completely different. They're two different formats, two different forms of journalism. When you do a live, you have to react to breaking news, something there and then, and it's actually that's very hard.
It's hard.
When you're doing a panorama, you can have 3 to 6 months to make a half an hour program. But even that can sometimes feel like not enough time because you're trying to investigate one topic very thoroughly. So within that time, you're researching, you're producing, you're filming, then you're in the edit, and then you have to make sure that everything's accurate and everything's truthful. So we have longer. It's different to presenting live on air, but at the same time, it has its own challenges as well.
And I imagine one of those challenges is keeping it fresh because, you know, some of the audio pieces you've done, the 24 hours in Snapchat and the Heart and Soul piece you did for BBC World Service. And I know both of you mentioned case studies and, you know, trying to speak to influencers, and sometimes it can take months for those people to get back to you. Is it quite difficult to keep the momentum going throughout that whole process, do you think?
Yeah, it can be difficult. I think with investigative journalism, one of the things that you have to learn or understand is you need to have more patience than for daily news, because you're going to be asking more of a contributor. So you kind of need to form a relationship with them, and that will be sometimes chatting to them multiple times before you even have the interview. You want to make sure they feel comfortable, that you're both comfortable with essentially what you need them for. And with keeping it fresh, that can be hard because let's say I'm working on a film that's going out in 3 months' time, but then Monika's working on a news story on the same topic, and then that's going out tomorrow. I then have to change what I'm doing because everyone's seen it already because Monika's done it. If I just give you a quick example, so the last film that I made was 2 weeks ago, and it was on what's happening in Israel and Gaza at the moment. Now the news is currently covering that every single day. And one of our challenges were, well, what can we put in a half an hour panorama that will feel fresh for the audience and be seeing things that they wouldn't have seen before? And one of those things really was getting the trust of people who were both in Gaza and in Israel that hadn't spoken to anyone else and been anywhere else, and get them to agree to share their story with us.
And a lot of the stories, you know, like that is obviously really traumatic, and a lot of the case studies that you'll speak to, so the Panorama piece you did on Operos, the GPs across the UK, there's some really upsetting case studies within that, and similarly with you and the 24 hours in Snapchat and the secret world of trading nudes. How do you personally and professionally deal with those kind of traumatic and difficult stories?
Yeah. So when I worked on the Panorama, the secret world of trading nudes, I think it was every day we were speaking to multiple women who had their nudes shared online without their consent or knowledge, or they were secretly filmed. And it's almost as if we had to tell them this information, and it was really difficult to deal with. And we were trawling through so much horrific footage, and it was literally probably one of the most shocking experiences ever. And I think we're lucky that we work in the BBC where it wasn't just a me thing. Like, we have such an amazing team around us, and we have the most professional people on board. There was counselling, psychological services that we had access to 24/7. But first and foremost, it's that duty of care that we had to our case studies and making sure that they're okay every step of the way. And because we were in these circles, one of the things that we had to do straight away was to immerse ourselves in charities. Like, you know, so as a revenge porn helpline, Not Your Choice, because if we're going to be dealing with these victim survivors, we need to know how to talk to them, how we can gain their trust. And we had initial research chats with so many charities to make sure that we were speaking to them correctly. So they were our focus. And then, yes, I mean, it was awful what we had to deal with, but we were lucky that we had an amazing team behind us that could help. And I think within the doc as well, what we did was actually expose a perpetrator who was sharing these nudes of women. So essentially that kind of put my safety at risk, and I was really terrified, thinking, oh my God, is he going to come for me? Is my phone going to be at risk? What's going to happen? But likewise, you know, the BBC, I had every safety protocol ticked off when it comes to physical safety, online safety. I had checks. I made sure that my family's safety were okay as well. And I just think I'm lucky because of the organisation that we were in, that I was able to get everything ticked off before we were exposing the perpetrator and before this doc went on to air.
I mean, that was actually my next question, because obviously you spoke to lots of people who'd been privy to this, and they weren't even sometimes people who had shared explicit photos. There was an influencer who was just doing her job, and they'd obviously, they'd used her, and there were questions about, well, where does she live? What are her socials? And how do you take yourself out of your own head almost, and know that you're going to be putting yourself at risk almost, and that people might think, well, actually, you're our next target?
It's tricky, I'm not going to lie, but for me, it was about the justice. It was about getting justice for these women. And I had to almost take myself out of the equation and put them at the front, because this is not something that I have to deal with on a daily basis. It's something that they have to deal with, and there was no justice. They were stuck in a legal loophole where there was no legal protection, that everyone has access to their images, and the perpetrator can say sorry and essentially get away with it. And for us, the key priority was creating these conversations, changing the narrative, making sure that women aren't victim blamed, and also making sure that these people have a platform where they can change the law and where they can get justice. So I almost just had to blur myself out of it and just make sure that we were on the right path in order to create big change and big impact from the program, which we did, because then we ended up changing the law with our Panorama documentary. And I'm so proud of the women that spoke to us, because I think that's the biggest thing I've achieved in my whole journalism career.
And
today.
that must make all the stress, all the horrific things you had
Yeah.
to witness. Does that make it worth it, the outcome?
Absolutely, because when you know there's wrongdoing, you just have to make sure that you highlight it, and everything else was almost on the back burner, because I just wanted to make sure that this is doing what it's meant to do. And I think I'm just lucky because I had the best team to help me, and they didn't. They're dealing with it on their own. They're suffering by themselves on a daily basis, and they don't know who to reach out to. So the least we could do was just be there in order to give them that microphone to hear their voices and get them amplified.
And you've talked about obviously having a big team around you, but you, in your own worlds, you're almost a team within yourself, because you take on so many roles and you wear so many different hats. How do you enjoy being the producer, the researcher, the journalist on a project? Do you like being able to take kind of more creative control rather than just being the presenter?
Yeah, no, it's... I've had this sort of jack of all trades role at the BBC, where I do a mixture of reporting and producing, and I enjoy that, because there are some times that I just like to get stuck into the journalism. I mean, in terms of the two, I don't know if it's clear, because it wasn't clear to me what the difference between a producer and the reporter necessarily was. So on a Panorama film, the most important roles are not the person that you see on screen. And I think a lot of the times is when we like, oh, there's that journalist on Piers Morgan, and they become celebrities. But really, the journalists are the ones that you don't see, and those are the producers that are actually making the Panorama film that you're watching. So it's good to sometimes be behind the scenes and making the film, but I mean, at the moment, I'm just working on a Panorama that I'll be presenting next year. But I think it's when there's a story that really matters to you personally, that you feel like you can deliver better than anyone else, then it's good to be able to have a mixture of doing both. But it's hard to find a place where you can do both. It's kind of either you're going to report or you're going to produce. But once you get to a level where you can do both, you're going to be able to navigate that better.
And not just within TV, but radio. I know I've listened to radio pieces that you've both worked on as well. And I think sometimes there's a misconception that radio is easier and you can just sit behind a mic and record it. But I mean, with your 24 Hours in Snapchat piece that you did, there's so many different elements that go into that. There's so many pieces, and it must take a really long time to put these things together.
Oh my God, absolutely. So I'm actually trained in TV. So I know how to use a camera, I can film, I can edit. We did Tuesday news days when we were at university. So give me a camera, it's fine, I'll do a news piece. So radio was really different for me, actually. And it was the first time I did a proper full-on half-an-hour radio doc, was with Radio 4. And I think it's so important because I think everything now is also multi-platform. So you can't just do TV. You've always got to think, how can I adapt it to audio form? How can I adapt it to online? And you're always thinking about different treatments. But I think for me, in terms of radio, what I loved is that I could really focus on their voices and the story and the journalism without thinking, oh my God, like how do I look, or what piece to camera should I do, or thinking about, you know, writing to picture when it comes to scripting. I found with radio, you could really listen to your case studies and your voices. And you've been in radio for literally most of your journalism career, haven't you?
Yeah, so I started in radio and then transitioned over to TV in the last sort of 4 or 5 years. Listen, I make television, but I get a lot of satisfaction from making radio.
Yeah.
For me, there's always something about if you make a radio doc or a radio package and you make it creative and the way that you use sounds, it's almost you have to use a lot more creativity because someone's not seeing it. So you need to paint a picture in their mind.
Yeah.
And so when you can create something that does that and somebody can visualize what you've put down in audio, I almost think this is, for me, I just almost find it more satisfying.
That you're describing the scene. So I remember when in my Snapchat documentary, we literally had to recreate Snapchat, but in audio form. So it was the sounds. It's being really creative. Like, what are the notification sounds? What can you normally hear when you go through a Snapchat story? Or when I was going to interview someone, it's making sure that the audience are clear on those transitions.
Well, you've taken them on a journey, so you'd be
Yeah.
would hear your voice, you know, through the phone rather than through the microphone, and those little
Exactly.
changes, it really illustrates what's going on in a
Yeah.
non-visual way.
Absolutely, I think that's it. And even when I was sat down with a case study, it was just, you know, describing, as you said, describing the scene, what's going on around you, what can you smell, what can you see. My case study just made cookies, and I was like, really like over accentuating how yummy these cookies were, because that's the thing, you need to set the scene. And I think, you know, sounds, audio, long form podcasts, they're so popular these days. It's really the future of journalism, I think. So, yeah.
What do you prefer, or do you like having the variety?
Yeah, look, I think now you kind of have to be a multi-platform
Yeah.
journalist, I think, today. And I'm pretty sure that your courses would be teaching that. So it's
Yeah.
across online, and online can be whether it's writing articles or it's digital platforms like using social media, which, by the way, is like at the heart of everything we do now in journalism. And then it's like how to use a camera and how to use audio equipment. So really make the most of the training that you get on these equipments here, because when you get into a job, the reality is they're not going to expect to need to train you necessarily. They're going to think that you can just do it now. So yeah, just pick up all the skills, even if you like one more than the other.
Yeah.
Of the stories that you've covered, and there are many, which would you say personally has been the most rewarding and which has been the most difficult? And are they the same story?
Oh, that's a tough question. It's a good question. The most difficult, just because it's fresh in my mind. Actually, I think I'm just going to go back to this Israel-Gaza film. That was difficult because I think people, when you're a journalist, I think there's this perception that we're robots and that there's no human emotion involved at all. But we were sitting in an edit for about sort of 72 hours, and we are looking through footage that we're trying to decipher whether the audience can watch this or not. So we're looking at raw footage coming from Israel and Gaza, unblurred, and we are looking at it like constantly to decide whether something can go in the film or not, or if we have to blur something or not. And that was the first time in my career that I actually felt like I had to step away from the room for 5 minutes and just take a break, and that was difficult. And I just want to pick up on something that Piers Morgan said about be alert 7 days a week, 24/7. Yes, that's what people are going to say to you when they're going to try and motivate you to be that way, and actually you should take some time to step away from journalism and step away from the work, because it's a really demanding job that doesn't have an off button, because news just happens all the time. So where you can take 5 minutes to step away, do so. And I didn't do that before, and I learned that I needed to do that on that film. And in terms of the most rewarding, I think a year ago we did this film that you mentioned on operas, which was we, for 6 months, produced a film where we sent somebody to work undercover in a GP practice, where we were uncovering bad practice, and basically the people who owned the GP practices were running it for profit rather than running it for patient care. That was rewarding because we had 6 months to basically find someone who was actually a uni student, and recruit them, pretend that they were a receptionist, write out a job description CV, and then apply to GP practices across London that we thought that this was happening. Obviously, we don't know that she's going to get the job. She actually has to have the interview and then get the job. That all happens. And then she's in there for 6 weeks with a secret camera, and we basically weren't getting anything for about 4 weeks. And in the last 2 weeks, a couple of people probably said something they shouldn't have said, and it was caught on camera. And then that gave us our news lines, and then the film went on to be brought up in Parliament, and then go on to sort of start a campaign for change in GP practices, which was quite rewarding, for sure.
That's really interesting to know how it's put together in terms of recruiting, because I presume she was a journalist when I watched it, and I thought, how have you managed to create this secret identity to get her in there?
Yeah,
and actually
yeah.
knowing that for 4 of those 6 weeks, people didn't really open up because they did, obviously it was made anonymous, but she did get a lot of information from people working there.
Yeah.
But that's interesting to know that because it was only half an hour program, actually, 4 weeks of that work we didn't even see.
Yeah, I know that sounds crazy and deceitful, and it is. But there is a reason for that. We had to spend a few months finding the evidence of this happening in the workplace. Then we needed to get the visual evidence of that. And the reason why we couldn't use a journalist is because you can Google a journalist's name and see who they are. So we got somebody that was interested in journalism and trained in journalism in university level, but didn't have any profile and didn't have any work that anyone could find, so that we could use her real name and send her off to work as a receptionist for 6 weeks for us.
That's great. Well, it's a great documentary, so I definitely recommend everyone check it out. And Monika, what about you? What's been the most rewarding, the most difficult story?
I think inevitably it goes without saying it has to be the Panorama, the secret world of trading nudes. It was difficult in the sense that I didn't have a top line when I first pitched the story. It was literally a message that came through on Instagram by one of my friends that there's this community on Reddit that was sharing nudes of women without their consent or knowledge. And I just remember I had the idea and I was just thinking, what do I do? Who do I take it to? And I think that's why having strong contacts in the industry is really important, because you never know when an Instagram DM will turn into a panorama, which ends up changing the law. So I think definitely that was the most difficult, but also the most rewarding, because I think it was a couple of days ago or last week or something, the online safety bill, the amendments were made, and now so many women, victims, survivors, men as well, will get the justice when their explicit images are shared without consent. And I will never forget when the Law Commission rang me and they were like, Monika, the documentary helped change the law. And I think I cried. I actually think I cried. Like, at the end of the day, we're human, and that's just what I wanted to see for everyone involved in the documentary. And even when I spoke to some of the case studies, they cried too. So we were just so overwhelmed with joy. So I think that was definitely the most difficult, but also the most rewarding. It was crazy to get it off the ground. Probably got rejected 10 times, my ideas always get rejected. If it doesn't happen the first time, please do not feel disheartened, because there's always another editor, there's always another outlet, and there's always another vision for your story. So just carry on going. But I don't think I've ever had an idea that's always been commissioned straight away. It's always been a bit of a journey, but eventually there is an editor that understands it. Oh God, I've done so many stories, I can't think of any others at the moment. But yeah, it's been a journey. It's all interesting, isn't it? Yeah.
You've both covered dealing with rejection, which we do tell students that will happen, and Piers Morgan talks about having a thick skin. What other advice would you give to yourself 10 years ago? Yeah,
I think it's to we're still dealing with the concept of rejection today. I'll pitch a story. I pitched a story recently that got turned down by about sort of four editors. Then it just took one person to agree, and then it went out a few months ago. So that's important. But the other thing that I'd say, and I didn't really understand it when I was sitting here 10 years ago, and that's the importance of impartiality, especially if you want to be a journalist. I know that someone asked a question to Piers Morgan about being opinionated. There is a difference between Piers Morgan and journalists. So he's an industry of himself. So he's hired to be the person that he is and give opinions. But if you work in the industry as a journalist, you're not hired to give an opinion. And the way that I would explain it very bluntly is that no one cares what your opinion is on a matter, and that's not why we become journalists. We all have opinions on various things. There's something happening right now in the world that is dividing everybody. But your job is not to present your opinion to anyone, it's to give people a platform to say what they want to say and give them the opportunity to express how they're feeling, and also to balance that and reflect how different people across the country feel about something. And that's something I didn't quite understand when I got into it, because I got into journalism thinking, oh, I want to make change, and I want to represent these voices and all that stuff. And that's great, and you should do that. But don't lose sight on balance, don't lose sight on impartiality, and just don't lose sight on how important it is to just serve people truthfully, and not necessarily just taking a perspective on things.
And I think be careful, because you don't want anything on social media to come back to bite you, and it does happen where people will troll through, and anything controversial or anything where you are giving your opinion.
Delete those tweets.
Delete it.
Delete them.
Go through it. Delete it. Just have that impartiality. Make sure you don't have that bias. I think for me, what I would have done is probably utilize social media a lot more, because I had so many ideas back in the day, and I was like, oh God, I've got no outlet to actually give them to. And I think because with the rise of TikTok especially, what I would probably do is work up all my story ideas into like a mini TikTok series or episode, or even take it to Instagram Reels. And I think there's a massive need for that at the moment. And you can see how media outlets are going to TikTok, ITV, BBC News to share their stories. And we are getting so much engagement with the younger generation. And it's amazing to see, and a lot of us do get our news from Instagram and TikTok. So I think definitely that is what I would be doing. But I also just think, don't limit yourself and just think, because I was very much thinking about the obvious, like BBC TV package or something or another when I had an idea. But I just think there are so many different outlets now. There are so many different editors. It's almost just thinking how your idea can work for, say, social media or radio or a podcast, and not particularly one niche, which is, a TV package on the news. So I just think, have your story idea book, make sure that you know who are the planning editors of different outlets, who you can take your story to. Don't be afraid to email people, meet up for a coffee, have a phone chat. Don't be scared to just email any journalist that you like and ask them to be your mentor. Also, be proactive. It's not about if you get a rejection, that's it. Just think about, actually, one thing that Louise Minchin told me is I pitched an idea to BBC Three. It was about colorism. It was something that Leanne from Little Mix actually already did. And my idea was so similar to the one that they were filming. And then it went out a couple of months after. And I was really like, oh God, they stole my idea. They did my idea. And I was so angry and annoyed. And I was quite bitter. But one of the things, actually looking back and having that discussion with Louise, is I probably should have done, actually, can I help produce it? Because their idea and my idea were so similar that I should have had that in anyway, because I had the contacts and, it was very much on the same wavelength and I had access to. So it's just thinking, instead of being bitter and, a no's a no, it's like, how can I get an in here? And then you never know, the next BBC Three one, I can work on it, I can be more of a reporter role or be a producer, etc., and so on. But just, always think about your in and how you can help in any way when it comes to stories. Trying to think of any other advice.
I mean, you can ask some more questions. We'll think of some more. I think it's also just to don't take things personally as well. It's kind of linked to the rejection thing, but newsrooms are very cutthroat environments, because you have to make decisions quite quickly. And so, if you have an idea or if you pitch something and it kind of just gets kind of rubbished very quickly, like, don't take it personally.
Yeah.
It's just the nature of how the newsrooms work, and just keep going and keep pitching ideas.
And one more thing, when it comes to presenting, a lot of people always say, oh, I have to change my accent to be on BBC News. No, never ever change your identity or who you are in order to become a BBC News presenter, because I just think you are what makes you unique, and we need to see more representation. We need to see more diversity. If you've got a northern accent, I love it. I'm here for it. Embrace it. We want to see that, because quite frankly, when I watch a northern presenter, I'm like so engaged. I love it, and I'm way more involved in the news than I am that someone that's like, oh, it's just sound the same, they look the same. So I just think embrace who you are, embrace your identity, and then just embrace what makes you different as well. I think that's so important.
Okay, and on that note, let's hear from some northern or not northern voices. We're not going to restrict you and open it up to some questions.
You talked a lot about safety, especially with investigative journalism. How, when you're starting to think of ideas and research for your story, what preparations do you put in place for your safety?
Okay, I guess that really depends on the employer that you have. So let's just say in the context of the BBC where I work, we have multiple layers of senior positions that would be taking our safety seriously. So for example, let's just talk about the undercover that I mentioned. We had to ensure a lot of things to that person was safe, even after that production had finished, because then people know who she was and she went undercover. So those things are taken really seriously, and really no decision for any deployment or being deployed anywhere can be made without doing something that we call a risk assessment. So let's just say there's a breaking news story, I don't know, in Leeds City Centre, and your boss says, okay, you need to go there and cover it. If it's deemed to be dangerous, or even if it's not deemed to be dangerous, either your production manager or your editor or someone senior will have to fill out something called a risk assessment that judges what risks would be posed. Are you the right person to be going there? Have you had the right training to deal in these situations as well? And also, it's your responsibility as a journalist to raise things, because sometimes, everyone likes to think that journalists are really brave, they just go out to things, but you might feel uncomfortable with something, and it's up to you to raise that to your editor, and they will take that seriously, and ultimately, judge what is the safest way for you to cover this story.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think so. When it came to the Panorama, it was every single location we were filming at, there was a risk assessment to make sure it was safe. But also when we exposed the perpetrator, we were in a blackout van, for example. We had to pinpoint where you've got the police station, you've got hospital, etc., escape routes, and so on. So it's not like you're going into it blind. At every single point of filming a Panorama, there is a risk assessment where safety is always assessed. And so for me, for example, I was a reporter. I had an online safety team, BBC Investigations, working to make sure that there's nobody, trolling me online, giving me abusive messages or trying to stalk me online. And then there was also a physical team. So if I felt ever there was a physical threat, that was monitored as well. So it really does depend on who your employer is. But with the BBC, they are renowned for their risk assessments and their safety.
And use your own common sense as well. Like, don't put yourself at risk unnecessarily. And always, whether it's you're doing a project here at university, like, check in with someone senior, let them know what you're thinking about doing, and get their advice before you go ahead and do it.
Yeah, because your safety is priority, always.
Hi, I have a question for both of you. Am I allowed to ask both? Yeah. So, Monika, I was really inspired when you brought up that one of your first stories that got this big amount of attention was about skin bleaching, because I recently made a documentary about it. And I feel like as women of color, we have such a wealth of experiences to pull from when it comes to developing stories. But I always get caught up in the conflict of wanting to center my experience, but also wanting to make it relatable to a general audience. And it's like having to constantly explain myself over and over and over again, but I feel like that's kind of our role as journalists. So how do you balance wanting it to be as obvious to the general public, but also relate to those brown girls who want to see this on screen?
Yeah, no, I think it's so important because if we don't cover these topics, who else will? And if we don't bring them to the limelight, who else will? And for me, I had a personal experience where someone actually said to me, Monica, I think you need to lighten your skin. And I was thinking, what on earth? And I was just on holiday at the time, actually. And then I was just thinking, this is not okay. And then when I investigated it further in the UK, it's an actual thing here. And I just think it's really important to represent, especially because a lot of people in the newsroom, they don't know your own personal experiences. Everyone's got their unique identity, their own experiences, and it's important to educate. And I think as well, like if you bring you into the story, I think it's got potential and power to go far because you have that personal connection to the story where you can also be that case study. It's part of your culture, it's part of your environment, and you can just make it travel far, and you've also got that passion as well. It's always a tricky one because everyone always says, oh, you don't want to pigeonhole yourself. But then I just think to myself, no, because if no one else is going to talk about it and if no one else is going to do it, I have to. Because we need to get this story out there, we need to create awareness, and we need to inform, and we need to make a change. And I will do it, I will happily do it, and that's what I did, I think. Yeah, does that answer your question?
It does, thank you so much. Rahil, so you mentioned impartiality and platforming other stories, but what happens, like what I shared with Monica, when you are the center of the story? So I've been following a creator and a journalist named Bima and her firsthand accounts of what's happening in Palestine. How do you think, being an outsider, kind of like covering that, do you think that we should lend those voices to her and let her be the primary firsthand reporter? Or are we kind of allowed to, I feel like I'm messing up the question, but like, you know
I think
what I mean?
hear what you're saying. I think it's whether you feel like you cover the story or you give it to someone who's more best placed to do it. Look, I think it depends. I think Israel Gaza is a unique situation where obviously for our film we wanted to make sure that everyone we heard from was from there, so either from Israel or from Gaza, and give their perspective. And then our job is to just present that, and then the audience can think whatever they want to think. But for example, I think what you're trying to say is that you have a personal connection to a story. Can you still cover it? And of course you can cover it, absolutely. So there was this documentary that you mentioned that I made for radio, for World Service. It was, you guys have heard of Andrew Tate, right? Yeah. You guys are all familiar? Yeah? Yeah. Well, there you go. I think some of the guys might be fans in here, maybe. I don't know, maybe no. So Andrew Tate is obviously this controversial character, but I found that he was quite popular with these like YouTubers and TikTok stars that were like really young Muslim guys that really liked Andrew Tate. And I'm Muslim myself. And I was like, that's really weird. Like, why do you like this guy? Like, why is it that, you're connecting with this guy? So I did this documentary and it was called The Emerging Muslim Manosphere. So it's basically about this like Andrew Tate fan club that's growing in the community. So what we thought was a good way of going about it was introducing the fact that I myself am a Muslim, even though I'm a reporter of the story. But I'm going into my community to find out why this very strange guy is really popular amongst like a group of social media influencers, and why they like him and why they're sort of mimicking him on social media. So you can put yourself in the story absolutely in an appropriate way. I think the thing to remember is that when you do that, with that documentary, I had people that liked Andrew Tate and were telling me why that they promoted his stuff. And then I had people that didn't like Andrew Tate and why they were trying to reject that rhetoric. So as long as you're kind of providing a bit of balance, you can put yourself into a story and put your experiences into it, just as long as you're also representing other viewpoints as well on that subject matter, I think.
It almost makes you the expert, doesn't it? I remember I did a story on 1947, India's partition, and my nanny's a partition survivor. And so I put myself in the story with Nani, and I took the viewers on a personal journey, my nanny's personal journey. And I think it resonated with the audience so much more than if it was a generic news piece, because there's not that personal connection. I just felt like it was way more engaging, and that's the feedback that I got from some of the viewers and the editors. So I think, yeah, don't be scared to put yourself at the front of the story, because it creates a powerful engagement, doesn't it?
It just means more because
it
the
means
audience
a lot
connects
more.
with you
It's
because you've
personal.
got the experience
Yeah.
that you're talking about.
Yeah,
as well.
yeah.
And Rahil, within that piece that you were talking about, one of the influencers you spoke to, he actually then turned it round on
yeah,
you and
he did.
almost used you as a case study, saying,
know.
well, you're the sort of prime example. You're 34 and are married.
I know.
So
I'll give you some context. Yeah. So I was interviewing this guy. His name was Nabil Aziz, and he lives in Dubai, lives the high life over there, and he is like I don't know how to explain who he is. He basically is this guy that tells men how they should be, but he also tells women how they should be as well. So I did this interview with him, and obviously, I'm questioning him because as an interviewer, my job is not to let someone just go on a rant. My job is to question them, to extract why they're saying what they're saying, and also to provide another opinion as well. So I just, questioned why he'd written this thing. It was 5 rules of how a woman should be for a man, right? And they were the most ridiculous things I've ever heard. One of them was she should have no debt. She shouldn't go to university.
no social media.
She shouldn't have any social media. She shouldn't have a COVID jab. And it was it was exactly. But that's the thing. So you said you've got all of them, but I've got all of them as a guy, right? So I was so I said to him, well, this is ridiculous. Everyone's got these things. I as a man, I've got, I tick all these boxes as well. And then he said to me, well, that's why you are 34 and haven't got a partner, because you're not an eligible bachelor, right? And he might be true, I don't know. But when he said that, I didn't get offended. Immediately, my brain thought, "Oh, this is gold for the documentary."
Yeah.
Well, he then ended it saying, good luck finding a wife.
Yeah, and he actually said to me, "Good luck finding a wife," and we included that in the documentary. Yeah. I'm still single, but it still hasn't happened. But it was great for me. What it provided is that it kind of made me think that it made him look a bit of an idiot, to be honest. And he did it to himself, and we included that in the documentary, and it actually made for quite a funny exchange between me and him. There was a lot more that he said that I wish I could put in. So yeah, sometimes you're going to be challenged by the person interviewing you, but it's good to just remain calm and cool and don't get offended by it. Just sort of, if they're making a fool out of themselves, it's sometimes it can work for the documentary.
Doing your job for you almost.
Yeah,
I think we've
exactly.
got time for one more quick question.
Hi, I'm Navita Sahota, presenter/reporter at Bradford Community Radio Station, BCB 106.6 FM. Please listen when you're in the area.
Will do.
Have to give it a plug because we're all volunteers there. I've got a good idea for Panorama.
Oh, wow.
More than that, I've put a lot of research, years, into this story, found evidence, got liability admitted. Interested?
Yeah, well, you can tell us off mic, because someone might steal it, and then you know what I mean, they'll do it.
Thank you.
Well done. Excellent.
Thank you so much. Everyone, if you could give a massive round of applause for
guys.
Monika
Thank you.
and Rahil.
Wonderful. Thanks very much to Monika and to Rahil. We're going to be back.